All right, we will go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for the webinar on the new changes to the lead testing in school drinking water statute. My name is Caroline Olstad, and I'm the Lead and Drinking Water Specialist with the Minnesota Department of Health, otherwise known as MDH. Our other presenters today are Anna Schleep, the Lead and Drinking Water Coordinator at MDH, and Sarah Miller, the Education Finance Specialist with a focus on long-term facilities maintenance at MDE, or the Minnesota Department of Education. So just a few notes about the webinar today. This webinar is being recorded and will be made publicly available along with the presentation slides. Except for the presenters, all microphones will be muted. If you have any questions, please enter them in the chat and we'll address those at the end of the presentation. If your chat box isn't already open, you can do so by clicking the chat button on the toolbar on the top of your screen. And practice using that chat function, I would like everyone to please type in the chat box the name of the city you are currently listening from. And as you'll be able to see, your answers will show up for everyone to see in the chat box, but the chat box will not show up in the meeting recording. And if any technical issues occur, you can try leaving the webinar and then rejoining. Sometimes that can take care of the issue. But if there's any technical issues that persist, you can contact the webinar organizers at the phone number listed on this slide. We'll also, I think we put that in the chat as well. So feel free to let us know if you need some additional help. And we'll be using some polls today to make this session more interactive and as a way to get your feedback. So we'll start with doing a practice poll so you can see what that's like. And we'll go ahead and launch our first practice poll, which will pop up right on your screen in front of the slides. And that poll, as a practice, is what is your favorite football team? You can go ahead and make your selection and then click submit. And you'll be able to see the general results of the poll. Only the organizers of the webinar will be able to see the names and the responses to the poll questions, but everyone else will just be able to see the general results. All right, great. Looks like we have, tried and true Vikings fans is taking the lead by far. That's great. Thank you, everybody. So lastly, just as a reminder, we'll be sending a feedback survey to everyone who attended the webinar today, which will include some of the same poll questions that we're going to ask. So just in case you don't want to answer during the webinar, or maybe you need some more time to consider your answers, you can also submit your answers in the feedback survey later. So as an agenda for the webinar today, first we will be talking about the health effects of lead, and then we'll review the original Minnesota statute that went into effect in 2018. We'll talk about the Department of Health resources for testing for lead in school drinking water, and then also the Minnesota Department of Education resources for lead in drinking water through the long-term facilities maintenance, LTFM. We'll talk about updates to the statute from this year's legislative session, and then go into the consultation portion of the webinar to start getting some feedback on reporting and accessing lead results. We'll hopefully have some question and answer time at the end of this session, but if we run out of time, we'll capture your questions from the chat and we'll send out or post the written responses to those questions. So why is testing for lead in drinking water important? As you can see on this slide, ingesting lead can have many negative effects on our health. And many individuals with elevated blood lead levels have no apparent signs or symptoms right away. So without testing, people might not realize that they're being exposed to lead and that their health is being impacted. 3 things to remember about lead. One is that children are most at risk, and that's because they are still growing and their brains are still developing. There is no level of lead that is safe to consume, and lead impacts learning and behavior. Hence the importance of trying to catch any lead children might be being exposed to as early as possible. So before the 2023 legislation passed this year, here is a review of what the state lead and drinking water testing for schools law entailed. The former statute took effect in 2018 and required public and charter schools to create a plan for testing. There are model plans that can be used by schools, or a school can develop their own sample plan. Also, test all sources of water used for consumption. So drinking water or water used for cooking or food preparation. Test all sources of water within the school building at least once every 5 years for lead. Then make the test results publicly available and notify families of the results within 30 days. If lead was found above the guidance values, those taps would not be used until action could be taken to lower the level of lead at those taps. And at the bottom, we have the link to the statute where all this is written if you're interested in taking a closer look later. So our program here at MDH is able to help with those requirements by utilizing the Water Infrastructure Improvements for the Nation grants, otherwise known as the WIN grant. The program provides free drinking water test kits for lead and training for how to collect water samples, a contractor that can help with collecting water samples if need be, lead analysis of the water sample or lab analysis of the water samples, and assistance with reviewing the lab results and understanding the different remediation options if they are needed. So how our program works, we start with a training session with the schools, and then the facility will develop a plan for where in their buildings they would like to test the water. Then MDH will send a sample kit to them in the mail, and that facility can then go ahead and collect their water samples in their buildings and send it back to us at the Public Health Lab here in St. Paul. Usually, on average, it takes about 3 to 4 weeks to get those results back. And we will send the facility their lead in water results via spreadsheet and also a PDF format. And if we do find an elevated level of lead within the building, we can give some remediation guidance and talk through some of the different action steps that can be taken to lower that level of lead. And lastly, the facility can share the results with the public. So with that, I'll hand things over to my Department of Education colleague, Sarah Miller, who will share MDE's role in this important work. Over to you, Sarah.
Good morning. As we know, we're just July.
Sarah, I think we lost your audio. Are you able to maybe try something with your microphone? Okay. Sarah, we're still unable to hear you. We briefly were, and then got a little choppy and unable to hear you if you are talking right now. All right, so while we work with Sarah to get her up and running again, we're going to skip ahead a little bit and actually hand things over to Anishli to talk about the new statute updates.
Do that real quick. Maybe. You can see me?
Hi, I'm Anna Schleep at the Minnesota Department of Health. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit and we'll see if we can get Sarah back on to join us in a moment. So I'm going to talk about the current statute and the amendments that happened during the legislative session this year. So the current statute was amended by SF 2995, and that's what's making the changes that you guys will have to implement. Many of those have effective dates of July 1st, but I'll go through all of the changes today in that statute. So the first changes that I want to talk about are the changes to the testing level. So previously, we didn't have a set guidance value for remediation. And so that's the biggest change that we've seen in the statute, is that now that your sampling plans need to be updated to include remediating at 5 parts per billion and above. In addition, plans will need to be updated to include what water management strategies that you'll use to maintain water during extended closures, such as summer breaks or spring breaks or those kind of extended closures. And that plan must be publicly available on request. So we recommend that if you're revising your plan, that you keep your plan posted in the same place where people view the lead testing results. The next thing that we're looking at is the frequency of testing. So the frequency of testing didn't change. We're still testing once every 5 years at those same locations. So you're still testing at all the taps that are used for cooking and drinking water. And again, once every 5 years. So you can stay on your same testing schedule. In addition, when you do remediate, no matter what type of remediation you're using, whether you're taking a fixture out and putting a new fixture in, or if you're letting it run and doing flushing, once you've remediated, you want to retest to verify that that remediation worked and that that retest result is below 5 parts per billion. So you know that the action that you took to remediate worked. We've had a lot of questions about what to do with old test results. So this is a good place where you can put those old test results to work. So you can start using those old test results to plan ahead for any future remediation that you do. But when you're up for testing for your current results, that's what we're going to be looking at for those 5 parts per billion. So this doesn't go backwards in time to your old test results. You just want to be aware that all of those lead testing results are publicly available, so that you may get questions if you have results from previous sampling rounds that are over 5 parts per billion. So you can use those results to help you plan ahead for your future sampling and what future remediation that you might need. Looking ahead at some of the changes related to reporting. So there are several components of the current statute for schools that are changed with regards to reporting. So the first one is that schools must send parents an annual communication that includes your plan and how to access that plan for testing and information about how to find test results. So it doesn't mean you need to send them the entire plan or your entire list of results, but you need to give parents information about how to access those materials. And then make sure that that information is regularly updated. So you're looking at your testing plan, the testing results, and if you need to remediate, what your plans are to remediate. And then keeping that information updated at least annually if there are new results. So if there are no new results, because that's not a testing year for you, you just want to have access to the most current results. One of the recommendations is making sure that information is on the website, so that having it on the website in the statute. But you can also add additional information to help provide context to your results. Sometimes the results that you get directly from a laboratory might be confusing to someone who's not used to seeing laboratory results. So you can provide additional context to help explain the results to the parents and staff that might be viewing them. Some of the things that really can be confusing are sometimes people don't understand what the units of the measurement are, whether that's in parts per billion, which is sometimes called ppb, like the 5 parts per billion standard, but sometimes that's also listed as micrograms per liter. And so that abbreviation can also be something to help clarify. Or even when results are not detected and they're listed as ND for not detect, or even just sometimes a less than sign is used. So providing that additional context to help your parents and staff understand your results, and then that can help them understand the work that you're putting into having a safe lead-in drinking water program. Communication about elevated results. So when your results are elevated, which means 5 parts per billion or higher, within 30 days of receiving your results back, you'd want to either remediate and get your retest done, or directly notify parents and individuals who might be affected by that high result. The last component is MDH reporting. So previously, no one was reporting results directly to MDH. You would make your results available on your own way. Every school could have done that differently in their own way. But one thing that has been highly requested is kind of a centralized way to view results. So the other component that starts July 1st, 2024 is to report results and remediation activities to MDH. And so that's one of the other components that we're going to talk about today. You'll notice that we have to do a consultation with school districts and charter schools to make sure that that reporting process that we develop works for you and also works to meet the requirements that we have to meet. So we need to be able to make available all results in a centralized way for the results and the remediation activities. The next component of the statute deals with how schools might interact with their public water system for lead in drinking water. So one thing that we commonly hear questions about and kind of work to improve understanding on is the intersection between public water system water quality standards and what schools and childcares are required to do. So some things that we recommend doing at the start of your program is making sure you understand if you've got a lead service line, a galvanized service line that might require replacement, or lead gooseneck. So these are plumbing materials that bring the water from the main lines into your plumbing building. And sometimes responsibility for those materials can be either on the water system, on the building owner, or some joint responsibility. So understanding where the responsibility lies for those materials can be really helpful, not only in understanding the water quality coming into your building, but also giving you a first step if you are having to deal with remediation issues. So this public water system component allows schools to defer remediation if the water system is the cause of the elevated results. The most common things that might cause system to have be contributing to the corrosion or the high lead results would be if they're not meeting the Safe Drinking Water Act rules, if they're in the process of installing corrosion control treatment or making other water quality changes, or if they're in the process of maybe working with you to remove that lead service line. So those are some things you can think about touching base with your water system. So the as I mentioned, when is it practical to wait to remediate? So if that public water system has a ongoing violation for lead, which they would notify you about, it would also be listed in their consumer confidence report. Again, if a lead service line has been found and you're waiting to replace that service line before making internal building remediation activities, or if testing shows that the source of lead is upstream of your service connection, so it's coming in from outside your building. So one of the things that we recommend here is reaching out to your water system. You can find out information about the water systems, lead activities, if they have corrosion control treatment that they do. And you can also work with them to find out if you have a lead service line. All right. Do we want to check back and see if Sarah is able to hop in real quick? Otherwise, I will continue with.
Yes, I'm here.
Awesome, Sarah. I'll hop back to your slides real quick.
Okay. I do believe the subdivision 4 slide, so if we go back to the beginning, we can find that slide.
Okay.
Oop, right there. Down
Perfect.
one slide. Okay, if you go down one slide there, somebody said, no, you're exactly right. And that's what it says in statute, not including a charter school. To qualify for revenue, a school district intermediate, not a charter school, must have a 10-year facility plan. I think that's what your question was. I used to do approval of the charter school lease aid, but all they do is get $132 adjusted pupil unit. They may use it for any school purpose. I do know they are required certainly to follow the state and federal law, just like a school district. So certainly they do have to do the lead and water testing and mitigation. We know that, but they can use that 132 a pupil unit for any purpose. I'm not sure if that's going to answer your question. And I think, Dan, you had that question. Hopefully that helped. Oh, thank you. That's great. And I don't believe any more questions for me that you can see. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't think we see any more. on
Okay,
that
thank
one.
you.
Sarah, were you ready for your other slides?
I think I'm completed on all my slides.
Oh. Okay, then I will move us on to the next slides then. All right, and then this is Anna again. And so we mentioned that there's a consultation that the Department of Health has to do with schools and other stakeholders to help us make sure that when we do reporting and schools report results to MDH, that reporting mechanism is something that's not burdensome to schools, and that it's also something that's effective for us to be able to communicate results back with the public. So why does reporting result to MDH matters? So this reporting is going to be really helpful in allowing us to identify where additional resources are needed for testing and remediation. If one of the other statutory things that became available this session was a small grant for lead remediation to schools and childcares. So having the information about results lets us know about the need for resources like that grant or need for resources for testing. So it allows us to make informed decisions about the state of lead in drinking water in Minnesota. And it lets us know if the testing programs that we're doing are effective and helping to improve public health by reducing lead in drinking water. And then having one easy location for parents, students, and media to find the results can make it easier for them to access those materials. Every school and location sometimes has those materials available in different ways, and this would put them in one location where you could find them. If you're moving from a school to a different school, you would know where to get that information if you want. So having access to that information can increase transparency and accountability. It also allows MDH to help field some of the questions that you may get about lead testing and drinking water in schools, or help people who may have questions about lead testing in their own home. So we can take on some of those questions so that you don't have to. So there are several different ways that results can be reported to MDH. Most commonly, schools are getting their results either as hard copies of results. They may be getting them as PDF files. You may be getting them as a spreadsheet. In terms of how we can look at the results in a big statewide picture to understand, for example, how many samples are above that 5 part per billion standard that's been created. Having results available in some sort of spreadsheet or database format would allow us to answer questions like that that we sometimes get from students, media, researchers, or parents who are concerned about lead. So this is an example of a simple spreadsheet. This one, I think, actually came from Oregon, an example of one of the spreadsheets that they would get from some of their facilities. So they've got the facility submits, it's got a sample number that's unique to each location, a description of the location. So that first row, for example, was kitchen sink number 1, what type of fixture, and then the date the sample was taken and the result. In this case, it was a less than 2 result, which for our purposes means that it's not detected by the laboratory. If we look down a little further, there's a sample number WW7, and that one's got a description of outside, health office, maybe their tall drinking fountain, also a non-detected one. If we want to look at one that has a lead detection, we can see a WW4 sample number is a kitchen sink number 4. And that kitchen sink had a result of 12.56 parts per billion. So we know that that would be one that this facility would go back and retest or remediate so they could try and see what can be done to reduce the lead in that fixture. So spreadsheets for these can look a variety of ways depending on how much information is hoped to be kept in just the spreadsheet itself. Another way to look at a spreadsheet might be this example of one from, this is an example of one used by California. And so in this example, they've got not only the location, the result, but they also have columns to describe if remediation was taken after a lead levels detected above their remediation level. So this is another option that could be used for schools to report results to MDH. And just another example of the type of way that schools can do record keeping and then in the future report results. EPA has their own similar spreadsheet template. This one's actually available on EPA's 3Ts website. And this one has, again, similar fields where we would track the locations where you sample, the results that come in, and then if those results are above the 5 parts per billion, what kind of remediation occurred. So you'd be able to write in if a fixture was replaced, if a fixture was just taken out of service, if a flushing program was designed to remediate at that location. So if you happen to be in EPA's 3Ts guidance, this is part of their module 7 on record keeping. And so they have a spreadsheet template that's designed for large buildings, like larger schools, but they also have a more simplified version that's appropriate for, say, a childcare facility or a smaller school. So reporting to us doesn't have to be just one spreadsheet fits all. We may be able to create a couple of custom tools because we know not every school is the same size or has the same number of fixtures. I think that brings us to our first poll question, would be to think about what would your preferred format be for submitting test results to the Department of Health. Thinking about how results currently come to you. I know many places get results either directly from a lab, and if you're getting your results in a spreadsheet format or a PDF format. And if your format that you like isn't on this poll question, feel free to type in the chat a preferred format. And again, if you are having trouble with the poll at all, feel free just to type in the chat if you're not getting that permission. You can also sometimes submit in the chat window if you're having trouble with the pop-up window. We'll give everyone a few more minutes to. Okay. Looks like currently online fillable form and spreadsheet are the most common methods that people are interested in at this point. So that information really helps us because we're going to have to design some sort of template or form for you guys to fill out. And knowing what the best ways for you guys to get information to us is really helpful, so we can put it in a way that's not burdensome for you or your staff. And then thinking about, what's easiest for you to actually do the submission itself. So if you're logging into a portal and uploading a document, would you be emailing a spreadsheet or a form to MDH? If you just hit submit on an online form template, or if there's another way that works better for you to actually submit the results to MDH. Again, if you're looking in that chat, that's probably the easiest way to respond to the poll if you're having trouble with the permissions on the pop-up. Yeah, I see Lee's comment there about not having to do lots of data entry. And that is important to us also. We don't want to burden you guys with data entry, and we don't want to do data entry either. So we're going to try and do our best to minimize that as much as we can. All right, I'm going to move on to the next component. So submitting results is one thing that we have to think about, but we also have to think about how people will access and interact with results once we make them available. So I'm going to show a couple of different, oh, maybe I've got these ones. Show a couple of different ways that other states have used to interact with their lead in schools water results. So this is an example from California. So they've got an online map where each dot represents a school that's either tested or not tested, or in this case, they've got the dots are colored by if they had a result over a statewide action level. So this is just one example of an interactive map where people could type in an address or a school to zoom in to one of the dots, or they could just click on a dot and from that dot get information about the particular location. So the dot that I've highlighted on this map is a school that had one result, or at least one result over the California's action level. And so it provides some information to the person looking at it. Where was the school? And it also gives them the ability to select the results and pop up a table of results if they wanted to see all of the individual results. There's also a section for being able to describe follow-up activities. So in this case, the follow-up activity was pending. And once the school completed the follow-up activity, their dot could be updated to describe what they did. Similar, we have an example from Oregon. They also kind of, use that same type of method of mapping their schools as dots. So in this case, there's is more a dot that has results submitted or not submitted or not required to submit, depending on their particular location. And again, once you select a dot, it would bring up more information about the facility so that people could actually access the results for that location. These two methods are also kind of nice because they allow people to download the results if you're interested in doing something like a research project on results about lead testing in schools. And then just some other examples. So Department of Health has a data portal where we've often post environmental health data. So this is an example of a map with the blood lead level data in Minnesota as kind of another visualizing tool. We also have an example of search for your consumer confidence report. This is what someone might do if they're looking for their drinking water quality, that consumer confidence report from a water system. They could type in their city or water system and it pulls up the water systems report. Depending on which year they're looking for, they could select the report. So that might be another option if people wanted to just search and then get results that way. So that brings us to our poll question number 3, which is going to pop up for you guys. What is your preferred method of accessing and viewing results? So this one is a little shorter, like a database or a map. Or if you have another idea of how you might want to view or access the results. This is also a good place to think about, how you might want to use those results for yourself in the future. If you're tracking and looking for trends in your results, or if you have students that maybe are looking to do a research project on environmental data, we may be able to use those results as well. Right, seeing lots of database, few maps in there. Well, map is winning so far. All right, and then moving forward. So, like I said, the consultation process is something that you know, it was put into statute to make sure that we're doing engagement with you guys before we, you know, make decisions on having any of these requirements for you guys. So the next step for us is to make sure that we're looking at engaging some of our other stakeholders, you know, talking with laboratories that have to get data out to you guys and might be, you know, helping to provide data in a format that could make it easier for everyone to get that results with minimum data entry, or thinking about other people who might be using the results, talking to parents who might be looking at results and making it easy for them to find the results. So we do plan to do some additional sessions, and especially once we have a template ready to go, we'd be looking at bringing in some schools and childcares to see how that template works for them and if it's easy for them to do and use. So kind of our timeline would be to finish the consultation process in October, and then to make the reporting tools live and available in early 2024, so that we can all meet that deadline of getting that information up and available by July of 2024. And it also gives us time to be able to take in feedback in case we need to change anything before July, to make sure that, you know, this is a smooth process as we can make for you guys. So after this session, we will be sure to send out an email with the slides. And once we have the webinar available, we'll also have a page where you can access the webinar again and also find any updates on additional training sessions. And then just a couple of last questions before we wrap up and look at any of those questions you guys have in the chat. What are the best ways to get information to you? We want to make sure that we're getting information out to you guys in ways that don't hit your junk email box or go to your spam. So we've got in-person meetings, virtual meetings, email updates, physical mailers, or if there's something else that works for you. And then just to keep us moving on to the next goal, what are the best ways that you'd like to share feedback with us in the future? So today we did a lot of polls, but you know, some other ways we can take in that feedback is, you know, we could put a comment box on our website, sending out a survey, a follow-up meeting after that results process is operating, which I think we're planning to do anyway. But if there are other methods that work for you guys to share feedback with us, so that you know, get to be part of the process, and that you know that this results reporting is something that you got a chance to give us your input on. so we can try and make it work the best that we can for everyone. So thank you so much, everyone, for getting us all of this great information. I think we are ready for some questions. Okay. Of course. So if you've got some questions, feel free to put them in the chat.
Is it advisable?
Oh, so is it advisable to submit results if testing was done prior to July 2024? So I would say, you know, you can definitely submit results once we have a tool up. If you want to present, submit your most current results to us. If you tested in 2023 and you're not due to test again until 2020, let's see, 8, you're definitely welcome to welcome to submit results so that you could have them on our shared page. So that would definitely be acceptable. Do these new statutes apply to childcares as well? Great question. So childcares do have a new statute. Today we looked at just the school statute itself, but there have been changes for childcares. So we do plan to do some information sessions that is specific to childcares to cover their requirements, but childcares are required to test for lead in drinking water, just like a school would be. And that testing has to have started by July 1st, 2024. And they'll also have the same type of reporting requirement as well. So you'll test for lead if you're a childcare, the drinking water, the same types of locations, any of those that are used for food preparation or drinking water, and you'd also report results to MDH as well. The next question is, what if there is a pending large-scale remodel? Could we hold off on testing? Again, great question. So you want to stick to your 5-year plan for testing. If the building is still in use, I would say continue to follow your testing plan. So if you were scheduled to test, and then once you've remodeled, I would suggest testing afterwards just to restart your testing at that point. You guys see any other questions in there?
There's some comments. Oh. So just a minute. There's a Head Start person.
How soon do new buildings need to be tested once occupied? Great question. So the statute doesn't fully address that, but you would want to add them to your 5-year sampling plan. I would suggest once the building has become occupied and you've established your regular, your regular routine within that building, that you test, and then as soon as possible after the building's occupied, and then start your 5-year schedule. But you're right, the statute doesn't have a specific date. We could provide some more guidance on that when we make updates to the model plan to incorporate the statute changes. Oh, do we have a question on the WIN program? So this one is a
I'm a health coordinator for a Head Start program that has 9 centers in our region. To do the WIN application, should I do a separate application for each center or one application for all? So I'd say it tends to work best if you do an application for each location, so each of the 9 locations. Just because each building has its own water use plan and its own plumbing, it's a little easier to keep track of them that way. Do we have another question? Do we have to do a 5-year sampling plan regardless of the result of testing? Another great question. So yes, we want to keep doing that 5-year sampling because your water quality can change over the course of time. Not only can your water quality change, but your water usage pattern can change. So if you have people moving around in your building, different fixtures may be getting used at different times, or different stagnation periods may happen. So you may have different things that impact corrosion at different points throughout those 5 years. So that even if your results were low 5 years ago, it doesn't mean they'll be low 5 years from now. So that's why we do that 5-year plan for testing. We got that one. Got that one. All right. I think we got everyone's questions. Feel free to, again, submit. If you have more questions, you can email us at health.win_grant@state.mn.us, and we'll get back to you as soon as we're able to. And if we happen to miss any questions that were in the chat, we'll also type those up and include them as an FAQ when we get back to you with the link to the slides and the recording of the webinar. Great. Thank you all for attending the webinar today. Special thanks to Caroline, who is coordinating the WIN program, and to Sarah Miller for joining us and talking about the long-term facilities maintenance plan today.